I have so much fun doing things and doing activities and doing things together and sharing experiences. And I really believe that fans who have tapped into that, who have found the parks or something similar to that, something that brings them joy, even if people critique it and think they're crazy for liking it, I think that we've really discovered something as Disney fans. And the more and more, because I used to be on the outside of this, I never really had an opinion about Disney fans. I didn't understand it. But now that I'm on the other side, I now view the outside as being the ones who are crazy instead of us.
That was theme park journalist Carlye Wisel, and you're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 93 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton, and I'm really excited about this show. If you've been listening to this podcast for a little while, you probably know my background with Disney, which is I went to the parks as a kid in the 80s and 90s, really got drawn in by Epcot Center starting about when I was 8, going in 1984. And so whenever I'm looking at the parks and changes and what's happening there now, I'm still sort of looking through that lens. Yes, I go now with my daughters or for this podcast, but that background in what I experienced originally is going to impact it, which is why I always need to remind myself that there are so many fans that have come to Disney recently, sometimes even as adults, and have a totally different experience on what drew them to the parks, what they like doing at Walt Disney World and Disneyland and beyond, and just how much fun it is to go. And that's definitely the case with Carlye Wisel, who is my guest today on the podcast. She visited Disney World for her bachelorette party, not having gone over and over, and quickly became obsessed with it. And then as a journalist who was reporting on other topics, she now got really focused on theme parks. And that's her job. For the past 5 years or so, she's been writing and doing videos and co-authoring a book, doing so much having to do with theme parks. And what I really appreciate from this interview is the way that she talks about how she approaches the parks. I played a little clip at the start of the show. And just as this really fun place that adults can have a different experience than we typically have in our normal lives. And you can tell that through her Instagram stories, the way she is on Twitter, and her articles. There is that sense that, isn't it really cool that we get to do this? And I sometimes have to remind myself, too, when I'm thinking about the parks and going there, is like, it's still pretty amazing they exist. I may not agree with everything Disney does, but the parks are still super fun. And I appreciate that when talking with Carlye, that you can really sense her perspective there. And of course, we also talk about Rise of the Resistance and the boarding groups and how that's currently going, and also get her thoughts on that attraction and so much more. It was a lot of fun to talk with Carlye, and I'm excited for you to hear this show. So let's get right to it. Here is Carlye Wisel. Well, my guest today is a freelance journalist who's written numerous articles about theme parks for Travel and Leisure, Eater, GQ, so many more. She also does a weekly column on theme park news for SYFY. She's a co-author of the new DK Eyewitness Florida 2020 guidebook, which is in stores now. It's Carlye Wisel. Carlye.
Hello. Oh my God. That is truly the best introduction I've ever heard. I need to hire you as my hype guy and just follow me around and introduce me as such.
Well, I try. I do what I can. You know, you have a very fancy website, which makes it very easy. So I could find all the info.
My best friend builds websites. It's helpful.
So I'm excited to learn about your background and how you got into writing about theme parks. But I feel like first we have to tackle, I mean, this is so recent. We're recording this on a Monday, the 20th. Last Friday, Rise of the Resistance finally came to Disneyland. I have not been on it. I've been to Galaxy's Edge. And I know you've experienced it at Disney World and possibly here. So I want to know, without spoiling, I don't want to be spoiled because I haven't written it. What was it like? What did you think of it?
I absolutely love it. And it's so funny to me because the ride is it is basically exactly the same on both coasts. Like there's teeny, teeny, tiny, tiny things that I could mention, but it's almost the exact same ride, but framed within two absolutely different parks. So it was pretty wild to go to the opening in Florida when it's like no one's ever been on it. Like we're finally going on this ride. And then to go to Disneyland where it's, you know, a smaller, more local crowd. And it's like, oh, it's the opening again, but they're in completely different settings. It was really wild, but I am a huge fan of it. I think it showcases a really good push towards the future for Disney attractions. I'm very happy with it. The scale of it is very, very impressive. And I recommend that people don't spoil it for themselves, so I won't spoil it for you.
Well, excellent. Yeah, because I haven't watched the ride videos because...
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But I did watch, I couldn't help myself. I watched the part of the Imagineering story about it. And just through the ether, it's like... I have not been one of those people that mutes all the terms because I'm like, I want to know kind of what people think, but I still don't feel like I know the basics about, you know, your early parts, but especially the ride itself, like the actual, when you've gone through the stormtroopers and all that. I know there's a Kylo Ren and there's all these things, but I've kept away from it. But so I know, I mean, it's very hard for people to ride it, but when people do, I've heard so much, like, I say hyperbole, but I mean this in like the positive way, like people saying mind-blowing, game changer. So what do you think it is about it? Why is it drawing beyond Star Wars, which is part of it, but why is it drawing such a big reaction from everyone that's riding it, where people are just raving? And you know, Disney fans, we don't always rave about everything. So this is something.
Oh, no. I think one of the things that makes it so compelling is that it reaches this line where so much happens in the second half of the attraction that you almost can't remember it. Like you're taking in so much information so quickly when you're in the ride that you get off and you're like, wait, I don't even, like, what just happened? It's the only ride I've ever been to an opening for where people were really left speechless, which doesn't happen because we're all critics. Like, we're all going to say something when we come off board. And at the end, we truly couldn't wrap our brains around what just happened. And you have to kind of go a second, a third, a fourth time to really be like, oh, there was this scene, then that scene, then this happened, then that happened. Oh, I completely forgot about this section. Like, it's just so much to take in.
Yeah, and that's kind of the impression I'm getting because, you know, they've had a lot of openings recently, things like Flight of Passage or even Smuggler's Run, which, you know, I really like Flight of Passage. I think Smuggler's Run is decent, but it didn't draw the same kind of just like people like, I don't even have any words. Like, I think I'm speechless is the phrase that I heard over and over. And so you were able to go behind the scenes. I know I heard your podcast on the Disney Dish like a while back before. Yeah. So when you did that, I know you got some glimpses, but did that give you any gauge for how good or how epic it was going to be?
Yeah, it really showed us the scale early on. So I was able to kind of frame any story I wrote since then, and anytime I discussed it, even with friends, under this umbrella of knowing just how big it was. Because we were shown, I don't think this is a spoiler because everyone knows there's the Stormtrooper room. Okay. I'm like, I think you have internet, so you've probably seen it. Like we saw that room when it was very much under construction, but even just walking in that room and having them be like, there's so much after this, this is just one part. That really set the tone for what this is going to be. And it's just, I don't know, I've never been on an attraction that has this much happening and where you don't really know where to say the queue ends and the ride begins. It all kind of blends together. And I think for a lot of reasons, it's not traditional. And that's kind of like throwing everyone off, because you can describe even Flight of Passage like a huge accomplishment, a really cool ride, but if you had to distill it down, you'd be like, oh yeah, you're on this like Banshee thing and you watch a film. Like, it's very easy to just dial it down to something very, very small, and you can't really do that with Rise of the Resistance.
Right, because even Flight of Passage, you could say, oh, it's like Soarin', but more intense, which is not fair, but still. Or Millennium Falcon, it's like a video game, but you're flying, or it's like Mission Space, but better. You know, I feel like I asked you for no spoilers, and yet I keep just asking you more specific questions.
Well, because I don't know how much you know, so I'm trying to be very careful.
Oh, I know a decent amount, probably more. I'm just trying to think in terms of listeners, but just the fact that they've combined all the different ride systems, to me, is still kind of. I remember reading an article. This was like 2 years ago or something, like a Screamscape thing where it was basically like, you're going to get off the attraction and then walk and go somewhere else. And I was like, what? That can't happen. That's not real. And so that's where my mind still is having a hard time wrapping around how they could do that.
Yeah, I could tell you how they do it, but it would spoil a lot of stuff. So I'll refrain. The juice isn't worth the squeeze with like getting into the nitty gritty of like truly how it functions. But it is really interesting, because if you go in and the less you know, you're really not going to know the order, and you're not going to know what comes next. And they really stacked a lot of experiences into a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, and that's really impressive, just giving the operational things. So now the other big part of it, which I know I've seen, you've put some detailed information on this, which is why I wanted to ask, is the boarding group system. Because you posted a thread on Instagram that I thought was really helpful with some tips about how to do that, because it's not as simple as like Flight of Passage, where it's like, get there really early, go wait in line, or if you don't have a fast pass, just get there at 6 a.m. This is different. So can you explain that a bit? Like, what are the best tips or how this works?
Yeah, definitely. So it is different. You cannot show up and wait in a line, which is kind of, it's a completely different approach than we're used to. None of the rules are the same. Like, everyone is equal once the park opens. So what happens is that you have to be inside the park, inside that specific park. So you have to be inside Disneyland or inside Disney's Hollywood Studios before the park officially opens, which, if you're not familiar with how Disney parks work, that's already confusing.
Yeah.
Because the parks open before they open, but they're not open. So you have to have scanned your admission to be inside. And then once you're inside, when the clock strikes 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., whenever it is, you have to open the Disneyland or Walt Disney World app, and you have to click in and try to get a boarding group. And they go quick. They go within, the past few days have been going within, there's 2 different types. There's so much here. So they're numbers. They're numbered 1 through, I believe the highest at Disneyland is 100 and something. I think they were still giving out that high of numbers still, but only a certain portion of those are quote unquote guaranteed. So if the ride is running at full capacity, everything is working, it doesn't shut down for a few hours here and there, which has been happening. Groups 1 through close to 80 will get on, and then groups 80 and above are backup boarding passes. So they will only get called if everyone else has been through, which is so many layers of like, how do I plan my day? Am I going, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the main tips that I tell people is to have your party's tickets linked. So make sure you have everyone's ticket in the app so that you can get the same boarding time. Otherwise, you can't go together. The other tip that I heard recently, which I got to test out myself because I don't know if I believe it, but I've heard that using cell service over Wi-Fi is preferred. That's kind of hearsay. I haven't done it myself, so take it with a grain of salt. But that is something that I've heard people trying, and they have there's been positive reaction to that. But basically, just be sure you are inside the park before it opens, because even if you're in the park 1 minute before it opens or an hour and a half before it opens, if they're letting people in that early, like, you have the same chance at getting a boarding group.
That's so interesting. And judging by how Wi-Fi usually works at the Disney parks, I feel like maybe cell service is better. But if you're in a crowd of people that all are trying to do it, who knows? It could be a mess. So I agree. That's tricky. So am I able, here's my question. If I scan and go into the park, can I then just like at Disneyland, can I then just go to Downtown Disney or the Grand Californian if I'm still kind of in that zone and then just do it from there? Or do I have to be in the park?
No, you just have to have your admission scanned. And conversely, you cannot scan your admission into California Adventure and try to do it. It has to specifically be Disneyland.
So from what you've heard or know so far, is this system, are there just a lot of really angry people right now? Because I know the ride is incredible, but I still feel like, judging by it breaking down and all that, I mean, I assume they're going to get it together. How challenging is that? Especially like I follow a lot of this. People that don't follow it at all, are they just showing up and being lost, or what's happening out there?
That's what's been a challenge for me, is because personally, I'm pretty embedded in like the Disney internet community, but I write for a lot of people who aren't. So I'm trying to reach them to get the word out, to let them know, because especially this is so tied to early morning. And if you don't know about it and you get to the park, even let's say Disneyland opens 9 o'clock, if you get to the park at 9, you can't get one. They're all going to be gone. So it's been a challenge to get the word out. I figure just if you keep talking about it and keep letting everyone know, it'll maybe permeate to the outside. Right. But the ride is very advanced. There are a lot of components. And personally, I would rather deal with the pain and frustration and difficulty of a ride not functioning 100% easy because they push the envelope. But there's two sides to it, and both are very valid. Like at Disneyland, it's more of a local crowd. So from what I've heard, people are going to the park, trying to get a boarding pass, and they don't get it. They go home because they live nearby. But it's a completely different situation at Disney World, where your entire trip is planned out months in advance. You are locked into a schedule because that's the way the park operates. And then to have the newest ride, which if you're in town, you want to do it, have that be a complete variable, because you don't even know until the moment the park opens if you can get a boarding pass, and you don't know what time that boarding pass is, because you get a group number. So you're boarding pass 19 or boarding pass 27, and they'll give you a time estimate, but you don't have an exact return time, and you have to balance that against a schedule that you probably woke up for at 4 a.m. 2 months ago to book a fast pass. So it's juggling a lot of like, what is the best approach? And I think more than anything, it's a case-by-case basis.
That's a really good point, because I even think about it in terms of, even if you're traveling to Disneyland and you go for 3 or 4 days or whatever, you're in that park already. So you've got a few shots. But like if you're going to Disney World, there's 4 parks. And personally, I mean, if it wasn't for that, I'm not going to spend more than a day at Hollywood Studios. So it's kind of another challenge where you basically could just keep going there every morning. But then the alternative is, if it's breaking down a lot, you have this line at Disneyland that would just snake through the entire park. I'm not sure that's great either. So I don't know what the best solution is either.
Exactly. I am a fan of this system, especially at Disneyland. I think it's perfect for Disneyland. And the system itself has been working really well, which is great. At Disney World, it's just a challenge, because you also don't want people spending their vacation waiting outside at 2 a.m. at the park. Like, that's also really, really problematic, and also not safe because the weather's pretty cold sometimes. So it seems like there's no way to win. Like, I feel so bad for Disney, because like they're like, okay, just wait in line for hours. They're like, oh, okay, we'll do this. You don't have to wait. And like, either way, someone is not going to like it and someone will. But I think that this is the best system because it's fair, and like everyone has to wake up a little early to try to get one. And it's luck of the draw. But layered above a Disney World schedule, very complicated. But otherwise, I think it's probably the best solution, especially because when it works, you have a boarding group that maybe you have an early afternoon boarding time or an evening boarding time. So you can just enjoy your day and not have to physically wait in a line until then, which is the goal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember it wasn't as much as Smuggler's Run, but when Flight of Passage opened, and I remember going, and this was well after it opened, and just there was this line of people that went through like the whole park.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
It was like all the way back to Harambe, and I was like, and this was in January the next year, and I couldn't believe it. It was like 4 hours long. And I was like, basically looked at that and thought, I don't think this is how they want the parks to be. So I think that probably they learned a few things there. So it's going to be a challenge, but yeah, I don't really disagree with the approach. I just hope that they're able to kind of make the operations even work better, because I know it's like nothing they've done before.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to be easy on them, because again, I would favor a more complicated attraction that breaks down than them kind of just going the easy route and having something that runs constantly without fail.
Oh yeah, like just like they did like a spinner or something, and like, great, it's another Dumbo where this is something.
Exactly. Yeah. I keep saying it, but they push the envelope. It's really unlike anything else. There's so many parts to it. And when it works, it works.
Well, excellent. Well, all right. Well, I want to ask you about another thing, which is I know that you recently took a trip to a place I have not been, which is Tokyo Disneyland and also Shanghai. And it makes me very jealous, but I do really like talking about those parks because for a variety of reasons, I think they're really cool. So I'd love to learn a bit about your trip and kind of what you did.
Oh, yeah. So I came back. I went on a trip over the holidays this past December, and I came home and someone was like, oh, so like, how was your work trip? I saw your husband came with you. And I was like, oh, no, it was a vacation. Like I left a year of stress about theme park mania to go to theme parks. But the Tokyo parks I had been to once before I was doing this full time. So it was really interesting to go back now knowing everything I know and look at the parks from that perspective and realize what the actual differences were between there and here. Because I could feel it when I was just casually going to the park a few years ago, but now it was just blew me away because there were things you would never, ever, ever see in America. And then, so we did Tokyo Disney Sea, Tokyo Disneyland. I, on my own, went to Sanrio Puro Land, which is like Hello Kitty's indoor quote unquote theme park. There's a lot of experiences, not so many rides, but I loved it. And then I did Universal Studios Japan and Shanghai Disneyland.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to ask one important question about Tokyo. How was the Country Bears Christmas special?
Oh my God. Okay. So I was never planning on seeing it. And Rob Alvey, who's another theme park guy, he makes great videos on YouTube. I ran into him at some event. It must have been the Rise of the Resistance opening in December at Disney World. And he was like, you have to go. You have to go. And I'm like, but I'm not like a Country Bears person, which is controversial to say out loud because usually the bigger Disney fan you are, the more you're into Country Bears. And he was like, you have to trust me on this. And I went and I couldn't stop hitting my husband during it. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Every animatronic moved like they were built that day. Like it was stunning and impeccable and beautiful. Like it blew me away. And this is a property that I really don't care about. And then got there and was like, I'm a fan for life. Like it just fully converted me.
I had to ask because I saw you post a little clip and I've never seen it. But when I was a kid, they used to do the vacation one and then the regular one. And I wouldn't even say I'm the biggest Country Bears fan ever, but I know in Japan, it's crazy. Like people love it too. It's like the people that go are really into it. And then the fact that they do a Christmas show, I'm like, I'm still kind of baffled that it exists. So I had to ask you about it.
I know. And like, so they're typically like people in the parks are pretty reserved. Like my husband kept joking because we'd see like an unbelievable stage performance or like a section of a parade that would blow you away. And then people would barely clap because they would just like only clap a little. And you'd be like, what? Like that was incredible. Like, how are you not freaking out clapping? And then you go to Country Bears and you sit down and the show starts and everyone's clapping along. And it was like, oh my God, like everyone loves this. And I don't know if it's, they love it or it's very good. I don't know which way is inspiring the other way, but it was so good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I've heard that it's different there and in a good way. And it's fun that you were able to experience it despite not being are you more of a fan of the Country Bears now after that?
Oh, 100%. I had to be talked out of buying multiple stuffed animals of the characters because my husband's like, you don't even like the show. And I was like, I do now. It was an unexpected joy, just like the rest of the park.
Well, excellent. So I also wanted to ask, you mentioned Universal, and again, I have not been to Universal in Japan, but I've been to the U.S. parks. But I know they still have Jaws, and they still have some of the things that are gone, like Backdraft and all kinds of random stuff. But what was that like going to Universal in Japan?
It was really cool. So actually, both literally and figuratively, because it was off the water and it was December and it was very, very cold. So I try not to let that color my experience too much because I really did love the parks. There's moments when you're like, oh, where am I? Because it feels like Florida, but it's different. Like they've annexed part of a San Francisco area that when you're in Florida, you'd just be like, oh, this is familiar. half of it looks like Florida and then half of it is taken over by a Minions land. And then like all these other things are like a little bit of your memory and a little bit something else. Like all of the Jurassic Park stuff is in the wrong place. Like it just kind of melds your brain. But it was really cool. They have some different rides there. They have a few coasters that we don't have, which were very neat. I sadly didn't make it on Backdraft because my main priority was their nighttime parade, which is this absolutely insane, fully blown, like lights everywhere. Like they have a full Hogwarts Express. They have a transformer transforming. They have like all this stuff.
Wow.
It is like a show, but a parade, and it's all new tech, and it's wonderful. And so I had to go get a spot for that and couldn't go to Backdraft. But I did Jaws, which was it's very trippy to go on Jaws and be like, I don't understand anything that's going on. And then afterwards be like, I'm freezing. I'll get, a corn potage soup. Like that's like the local, like, I'm freezing. I'll have a corn. Like it's just, you're so like 1 foot in something in the familiar and 1 foot completely confused.
Well, that sounds great. Not the cold weather. That doesn't sound so good at all.
Oh, no, but the park it's just, I don't know. Everything there is so fun because it's familiar enough and it's things you already love, but done in a completely different way with completely different people. So it feels familiar and foreign at the same time, and it's so much fun.
Excellent. Well, I want to make sure we have time to talk about your background, especially just because, I went to journalism school and now do not work as a journalist beyond this, of course. But so I think it's really cool that you've been able to kind of carve out a really cool niche as a theme park journalist and as a writer. So I'd love to learn more about even your background and when you got interested in working as a writer and how that came together.
Yeah, of course. So I, majored in journalism. And when I graduated college, I went to University of Illinois. I was freelancing the whole time I was in school, but I was also working for a record label. And so when I graduated, I knew I was moving to New York. Like that was absolutely guaranteed, but I didn't know what industry I was going to work in. It was either music or publishing. And so I just kind of applied to jobs, interviewed, and took whatever job came first. And that ended up being music. So I spent a few years in the music industry living in New York. But while I was doing that, I was still waking up. I think it must have been like 7 a.m, which is early New York time. Like New York, nothing really gets started till 10. And I would take the train in early to the office and I would freelance write for the first hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning. So I was kind of still writing, cramming it in, knowing that I still liked it and it would be part of my life, just wasn't at that moment. And after a few years of working in music, I was kind of like, okay, I gotta do it. I gotta just take a stab at freelance writing. So I started freelancing and doing a bunch of lifestyle stories for different websites, doing a lot of sponsored content, doing a lot of kind of female-driven essays and articles and interviews and news coverage, kind of anything that came my way to build up my portfolio and just meet everyone. And then it really evolved into me switching from genre to genre every year. There was one year where I only covered exercise because there was a boutique fitness boom in New York City. So I covered every type of exercise class in the city for a full year. And then there was a year where I was writing about food. I was writing about I changed. I was tired of everything after 7-8 months. I would just switch. And then I got engaged, and my bachelorette party, I ended up going to Walt Disney World, somewhere I hadn't been since I was probably 5 or 6, just never really came up, was never really on my radar. I got married in April, so the bachelorette party was in February, and my favorite place in the world is Wisconsin Dells, which is the water park capital of the world. So you can kind of tell that like the interest was always there. I just didn't know which direction to be pushed in. And you can't really go to Wisconsin for water slides in February. You can go to the indoor ones, but you can only get like a day or two out of that. And this is my bachelorette party. So we went to Disney World. There were, I believe, 9 of us. We messed everything up. I have a friend, Jenna, who I went to high school with, who was a cast member at the time and truly saved our lives because we were so confused by everything. Like we went in blind. We weren't set up the way a family is, where it's like, oh, the parents decide and the kids come with them. And you're like, oh, you worry about maybe their heights or rider switch, whatever. Like it was 9 adults with 9 credit cards who all had different accounts that were linked. And we were very confused. And afterwards, a few of us were like, yeah, I'm never going back there again. And a few of us were like, there's Disney podcasts. There's Disney YouTube. There's websites. And we just completely fell down the rabbit hole. And I started writing a little here and there about it when I came home. home just because I became obsessed with it. And then it truly just snowballed to a point where I was looking to write more and more and more, but also, social media was taking off and Disney was really pushing their brand in a way they haven't before. So there were so many things happening because today there's news every day in terms of the parks. And it wasn't like that 4 or 5 years ago. So the both kind of like their pace and my pace met in the middle, and there was just more work and more work and more work. And now it's all I do.
Well, that's crazy. Yeah, because I'm trying to think because, I've traveled myself, with my wife, with my kids, and even with 4 of us now, I'm like, oh my gosh, the planning, the spreadsheets, all of that. With 9 people, well, especially 9 people that all have their own thoughts and their own, what do they want to do? I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Oh my God. And 9 goofballs who had no idea what anything was. Like, only had remembered it from childhood. We stayed in a Saratoga, it must have been Saratoga, yeah, Saratoga Springs treehouse. So like, keep in mind people who don't know what the words internal bus loop mean, like
oh my gosh.
Truly like took an Uber and were like, wait, what do you mean the Uber can't get to our treehouse? Like it was, it was so much, but also I could have just been like, this place is dead to me. And instead I just needed to know more. And the beauty of it is that was about 5 years ago, and I'm still learning things every single day because it never stops. There's always more to know about how to plan a trip to Disney.
Oh yeah. I mean, I went as a kid and then, now do a podcast and everything. And there's still something because I'm like, what is that? Like, what is this place? So even doing it professionally, I'm sure it's that way. So now that you're so immersed in kind of this crazy world, like what are your favorite things to cover or do when you're covering a park?
I love a ride opening, which is truly like the brattiest thing I could say is like, oh, my favorite thing, going on a ride before other people. Like, it's so rude, but there's nothing like, I don't love reporting quickly. It's not my favorite thing to do in terms of work. I don't love reporting news, but there's something about going on a ride and being like, I need to scream this at people right now. Like, I just need to tell them everything right now because people are waiting to hear and you can just give them what they need. And I find that to be very satisfying to just be like, everyone wants to know if this ride is good or bad. And like, I can help them accomplish that goal. So I love that. But I really, the parks feel weirdly like an office or like home now. So I just kind of like bumming around. I like having no agenda because it's so in opposition of the way Disney World is planned. So I just kind of like walking around being like, I don't have a fast pass booked. I'm just chilling because it's very, it's opposite of everything that place is intended to be.
Well, yeah, and especially given just the food and the constant changes with snacks or shows or everything else, you could go there and cover things. Like you mentioned, there's news every day. And a lot of it has nothing to do with attractions. It's just every other change. Or I admit I know almost nothing about merchandise and all that, but there's all of that. There's so many different sides of it you could look into.
Absolutely. And that's, I sometimes from time to time get emails from people who are like, hey, I really want to write about theme parks. How do I do it? And I always tell them to kind of dial down what exactly they like about it, because there are so many ways to go. Like I have a friend, Matthew Panzarino, who is at TechCrunch, and he and I will go to the same event and cover the same thing in completely different ways. Because he's talking about robotics and like, I don't even, he says things to me and I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. And then I'm also there covering the same ride, but it's just in a completely different way. And so there really is a lot of space and a lot of ways you can cover it, because Disney is like America's church. Like there's so much, it's so important to so many people go there, so many people need help visiting it. And you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, which is usually what I do at every party where I find anybody who's interested. But what it comes down to for me is that I really like figuring out ways to make the experience better. That's kind of everything I do comes down to how can I feel like a middleman between the park and the person, where I can ask PR like these very specific details. I can try to interview people and find out X, Y, and Z, like very, very dialed in specific things that people either want to know or don't know they want to know yet. And kind of connecting those two to make their trip better or easier.
Yeah. And you mentioned too that there's so many different ways to enjoy it. And that makes me think of, you've written a lot of interesting articles. One of them that I really found interesting was your article for Glamour about adult women that really love Disney. And I think just because, you've seen posts and articles that are like about childless millennials in quotes and all that, which I kind of hate that term, but I'm using it just because everyone knows what that means. But essentially, that article just about all different types of ways people enjoy Disney. Can you talk a little bit about that article?
Yeah, absolutely. So the funny thing is that that conversation started with an editor that I hadn't worked with before, but a friend connected us. And I originally was talking to them about covering just regular entertainment content stuff at D23 Expo 2019. We are now in 2020. I will not forget it. And I was just like, do you want these entertainment stories? Like, there's a lot happening here that would probably be a good fit for your audience. And she was like, actually, we don't really need news, but I went to Disney World recently, and I'm completely paraphrasing. I can't remember the actual email, but she went to Disney World recently and was wondering, like, what's the deal with all these like women who are hanging out having fun together? And I was like, okay, if we are doing this story, we got to do it right. Like it. And I kind of like clued her in on all of the drama and like everything that's been happening, and was like, if we are going to do a story on women who go to the parks together, it has to be like the anti-childless millennial piece. Like, this has to be the most researched, like in-depth response piece to that garbage story. And so she was on board, thankfully, and like the magazine was excited about it. And I was able to kind of mush a bunch of profiles of different women in the community in there. That story could have been 10 times longer because there's so many different people who are drawn to this. But I feel pretty good about the mix of women I was able to get in and kind of show what it's like for everyone and all the different things that draw them towards Disney and towards the parks.
Yeah, and I think the article did a really good job of doing that, because I've found, even with Disney being so much more prevalent in popular culture with Marvel and Star Wars and everything, that you still have this situation where people look at an obsession with Disney and they're like, well, that's weird. While sports, movies, other things are fine, which I don't know. What is it about Disney that still hits on that now?
It's really strange. I have kind of, in the process of writing that story, because I keep in mind, I had that conversation with with women every 30 minutes for a full day. I kept interviewing women. They'd be like, everyone says sports are okay. Why can't I like this? And I was like, oh my God, like everybody is correct. I think what it comes down to is that adults look down on other adults for having fun and for having joy, because it's technically not something we're supposed to have. That's supposed to be something we have when we're young and then we let our children do, which is, and I mention this a lot, but like that very much parallels Walt's original inception for Disneyland, is not like parents sitting on a bench watching their kids, but families having fun together. And I view a bunch of people going to the park as friends together as an extension of that. You know, it's your other family. You just hang out with your friends, having a good time, going on vacation, spending the day, whatever. It's weird that, Star Wars, the newest film, made $1 billion at the box office, yet the place you would go to experience that in real life is frowned upon. It's just, the dichotomy is so strange. It's so strange. And I think that more and more, that's why one of the reasons I am looking forward to, and this is a hot button topic, but why I'm looking forward to more IP in the parks is because I would like to see people who are fans of different sections of the company. I would like to see that come full circle, because right now, I went from being someone hanging out in New York writing about like fashion and music to going to Disneyland screaming about the prices of chocolate popcorn. So those people from my old life have no idea what this world is like. And I think that it will come for everyone eventually, because it is so fun and it brings people so much happiness, and there's nothing really to do. Like, as an adult, there's nothing to do. You either go get lunch or you get a matcha latte or you go home. Like, there's just nothing to do. And I have so much fun doing things and doing activities and doing things together and sharing experiences. And I really believe that fans who have tapped into that, who have found the parks or something similar to that, something that brings them joy, even if people critique it and think they're crazy for liking it, I think that we've really discovered something as Disney fans. And the more and more, because I used to be on the outside of this, I never really had an opinion about Disney fans. I didn't understand it. But now that I'm on the other side, I now view the outside as being the ones who are crazy instead of us.
That's a great response. I don't know what I can add to that because I feel like I think it has shifted a bit. Like I felt like I saw it more, but still, I mean, articles like you wrote though can only help, but it's still so weird to me.
That's the goal.
Yeah, because I mean, more people are going to share it, and more. I mean, they did, and it was read, and I think, like you said, we've got a giant Marvel land coming to DCA, and then obviously Star Wars just kind of fully being open now, and then who knows? Well, other things coming in the future. It's only going to be more that way. So I would hope that stigma goes away more because now I have kids, but I was a fan of the parks even as an adult before I had kids. And it was through podcasts and, like you mentioned, YouTube and blogs that I thought, oh, there's a lot of other people out there that I had no idea were there. And now it's even to another degree with Twitter and everything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of us. And it's so, it's nice that we're all able to connect because especially when so many people are on the offensive.
Yes. Well, another thing I want to ask you about, which I'm sure you got all types of feedback on, is when you rank the attractions at Walt Disney World.
Oh no! Oh no! I didn't know. I didn't realize we were talking about this. I must have skipped this.
Oh, that's okay. I'll be very nice.
No, it's fine.
I'm not going to question anything in particular. I'm just curious about that process because, and the kind of the response, but to do that, I mean, putting together a list is one thing. But did you realize even when you wrote that probably that you were going to hear so many different replies on what you put in what spot and everything?
No. So I wrote that because, I mean, practically that's a pitch perfect story for a website because people are going to share it if they agree with you and people are going to share it if they don't agree with you. And I say that sounding smart when really that's what I learned after I wrote it. So if I was a real SEO whiz, I'd be like, oh yeah, actually it drives traffic for these reasons. And it's a very lucrative story. But I truly was like, yeah, I'll rank them. And didn't think about it until my friend was sending me screenshots of a private cast member group on Facebook slamming me with hundreds of comments. Oh my gosh. So I did not realize, but the most interesting part is that I was just checking the website because I don't think it's up yet. I just updated it. So I just updated the Disney World ride rankings and the Disneyland ones I'm updating, I think tomorrow. I'm turning the story. But I went in to do it and was like, oh, I don't agree with any of this anymore. So my opinion on what's the best and worst rides have completely changed.
Interesting. So where would Rise of the Resistance go in this list now?
I believe I put it, I already turned it in. I just don't know when it's going live, but I believe I put it very close to the top. But when I rank it, it isn't exactly my personal ranking. It's kind of me stepping outside of myself and objectively trying to be like, what do I think has the most merit for the first position and the second position and the third one?
I tried to list my 10 favorites and I was like, well, this is impossible. And that was just at Disney World. I can't imagine trying to pick them all because they're all so different. But I'm curious, you had Expedition Everest as your top pick, even with the Broken Yeti.
Yes.
I love Expedition Everest. I rode it once with the Yeti. Oh my gosh, with the Yeti working. Oh my gosh.
Oh, you're so lucky. You need a button. You need a button that says that.
I don't even, it was just, we didn't know at the time we were seeing something that was going to be such a rare event when it was open. But is it stuck up there or has it kind of shifted now with how you've ranked it?
I believe I put it there. So the part of the reason that some of those rides are in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 position is that I viewed it as, let's say you go to Disney World for 3 hours. Let's say you go for half a day, a whole day. What are the rides that summarize everything about Disney Imagineering, everything about these parks? What rides give you pack the most punch for a Disney experience? Where if you ride one ride, I believe if you ride Expedition Everest, you understand that entire park and you understand so much about the company from it. So that's why I ranked it 1, because I think there's so many layers to it. I think that the design of it is out of this world. I think that there being a surprise mid-ride is very, very unique and something you won't get elsewhere. And I think that the queue itself, being kind of a museum, sets the tone for the ride in a way that no other queue has for me. There's just so much to it, where if you go to Disney World and you ride one ride and you ride that, I think that it tells a story. So I kind of let that influence the first 5 to 10 rides, but everything after that was truly just me being like, like what deserves the most merit? Like what is something that's very special for this reason, historical for this reason, and should outrank this or that? It is not easy. It's so much mental gymnastics. But the new one I feel pretty confident about. But also that's not my personal ranking. That's like me as a reporter. My personal ranking would be like Space Mountain 1 through 20 and then like a few other rides.
Well, now I'll keep an eye out for when it's updated, understanding it's not just your personal ranking, but just to try and share it, because that'll be interesting to see. All right. Well, I want to make sure we have time to talk about you co-authored a book.
Yes.
The DK Eyewitness Travel Guide to Florida. How did that come together?
They emailed me. It's truly how it happened. And I was like, sure. It was like that easy. I mean, the work wasn't easy. It was a lot of work, because a lot of what I say goes on the internet. I've only had a few print articles just because Disney, like the audience is so vast and people are Googling it all the time. You want that stuff online. So when I write stuff for a print magazine, you know, there's a whole other layer of editing that happens. So then you can imagine a book is an even deeper level of editing. So it was a lot of work, and it was a tight deadline, but we got it in, and I'm very excited about it.
How does this book compare to others? Like what's I don't know, give the quick description of it.
I wrote it. I'm just kidding. So I really, because DK Eyewitness handled the majority of the book, I kind of just came in for the theme park sections. So I was able to convince them to do things a little differently to make it easier on readers. But I think it's a really, really good primer where if you're someone who's like, wait, what? Like you're going, let's say, especially because people, when they are traveling to Florida from the UK, they come for about 2 weeks. And they do all of Florida, and they spend about a week at Disney World, maybe 2 weeks at Disney World. They're spending a lot of time in Florida. So I think it's a very comprehensive book for if you're coming to Florida for a multi-city vacation. It has everything in it, and it has a lot of details that you wouldn't know otherwise. But in terms specifically of the theme park section, I tried to break it out and pull out like very important tips in different sections. I tried to highlight things that are both unique and very important to know, where if this is the only thing you read before going on your trip, you will feel prepared. So there's no, like, if you just read like the 20 or 30 pages that I contributed, you will feel prepped and ready to plan your trip.
Well, excellent. It sounds perfect, especially for people like you've mentioned before that aren't as into or aren't as knowledgeable about all the theme park specifics too.
Yeah, I think it's a really good primer, the way that we collaborated on it, so that you can get a lot out of a very small amount of text, because I own unofficial guides. I love them. Len's my boy. And those books are super, super detailed. And I've learned so much from those, but there's people who are not spending their whole trip at a theme park. They're just maybe going for 2 days. So this kind of helps to wrap that in a lot of other things they might be seeing while still hitting the main points.
Cool. Well, before we finish, if you're interested, I wanted to do a quick selection of rapid fire questions just about things you like or don't like from the parks, just to learn a little bit more about you. So does that work?
Yeah.
All right, cool. These are very tough. It's very important you answer these correctly. There's no right answer. It's just to be silly. Okay. Millennium Falcon fries bucket. Is this an amazing way to carry fries or just a gimmick?
Just a gimmick. I found out after the fact, after I was screaming about it, because they promoted it saying filled with fries. So to me, I was like, oh, hell yeah. There's going to be like a bucket of fries I can carry around all day and snack from. And it ends up that it's more of an envelope. So it's very cool looking, but it is not the ideal fry carrying vehicle. So that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, the pictures, I looked at that and I was like, that doesn't look like a lot of room for fries. That's not good.
No. And I've seen people carrying around the parks and I'm like, God, they look cool. But also, I should just bring like a little Ziploc bag of fries if that's what I want to do.
Okay. Better Mission Impossible movie.
Okay.
Fallout or Ghost Protocol?
Fallout all day. Mission Impossible Fallout is the best movie ever made. Okay? Ever made. It is perfect. I cannot wait for 7 and 8. They are in my calendar. But Mission Impossible Fallout to me is like true. Like I forced my friends to go. I saw it in theaters like 4 or 5 times, like something very inappropriate. And I forced my friends to go to an IMAX screening with me. And afterwards I was like, wasn't that the best movie you've ever seen? And they're like, No. But believe me, it is a perfect movie. I love it. I watch it like listening to a song. I can't stop. I've taken a little break so that I can go back and it's kind of fresh, but it is heaven to me.
Yeah, I asked that question kind of like an alley-oop for you to dunk the basketball there. So
I appreciate it.
All right. So in your opinion, of these three parks, which of these parks has the least exciting food? Disney California Adventure, the Magic Kingdom, or Disney's Hollywood Studios?
Ooh, I knew you were going to give me those last two. Okay. So DCA is definitely not the choice because they have really good festival food. They're always changing up the menus. There's always seasonal food. And generally speaking, Disneyland tends to have more interesting food than Disney World, I think just because it's a smaller park and a smaller market. They did get rid of my favorite thing, which was Lucky Fortune Cookery's rice bowl, but it's fine. DCA is not not the one who will be chosen in this. Oh God. Okay. Who has the least interesting food? That's what it was, right?
Least exciting, but interesting works too.
I'm gonna say Magic Kingdom because DHS. There's a lot of places that I just like straight up don't eat at, but they do have 50s prime time, which I think is a home run. Yeah. And then I have grown to really, really like Docking Bay. I think they have some good offerings and kind of like a space Seduli canteen situation. So those two beat out my one interest of Skipper Canteen and Magic Kingdom, which is where I eat if I'm at Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, I wondered because, if you take Skipper Canteen out, I don't even know if I can ask the question.
I always reference that I once went to, it must have been a not so scary Halloween party, and they have that, like the special party brochure map. And I looked at it, and every restaurant listed said like hot dog, chicken nuggets for like every single offering on the map. And I read this while I was in Skipper Canteen and was like, yeah, no, like this is my spot forever. And it's, they have a whole fried fish on the menu. So it's kind of like having that in Magic Kingdom boosts it a bit. But overall, the rest of the food is not really my scene.
Okay, last two. These will be quick. Won't be as complicated as the last one, I promise. So what's an underrated Disney World attraction that you think deserves more love?
See, it's so funny because some things are underrated in the general populace. But in terms of Disney fans, like we all know the People Mover is fantastic. Like Tomorrowland Transit Authority is great. And I love it. And I usually go on it if I'm in the park. So I think that is super underrated because you can walk on and it's a nice break. You get to sit. It's fun. It's like a nice time to catch up with your friends. Did you ask about which park in Florida or the two different resorts? I started talking about People Mover.
I think I just said underrated Disney World. Yeah. So anything in Florida.
That's super underrated. What else? I'm going like around the park in my brain. I love a late night carousel ride. I don't always get to do it, but I think that's kind of underrated because at night it feels very magical. What else? Animal Kingdom. Yeah, I think I'm sticking with that.
It's a good choice. I can't argue with it. People Mover is great. Anything
else? I'm not a Carousel of Progress person. I respect people who are, but it's not for me. Though this will end soon, but I think that Jungle Cruise is terribly underloved right now. I think that there's a lot of like fan pride for different attractions and it hasn't really come their way. But once the movie comes out, that's going to completely change. But for now, the Jungle Cruise feels pretty like not appreciated. And it's always a good time.
I agree. I've enjoyed it a lot more the last few times I've gone on. Like I skipped it for a little while because the line was kind of long. And lately we've been going on it more and it's great. Okay, last question. Simple. What's your favorite restaurant in any Disney park?
Ooh, okay. So for the longest time, it was Tiffin's. And Tiffin's, unfortunately, has changed over the past year or so. I don't think it's at the same level it was at before. It was a really ambitious restaurant. They were trying, like, I was describing it as a New York caliber eatery inside a theme park. So Tiffin's has slipped, but my favorite place is Wine Bar George. I love Wine Bar George so much. They have these like mac and cheese balls. It's like the one place you can go and feel like an adult. I've only had wonderful experiences there with the staff. George, who it's named after him, like he's usually there and will like offer you different wines. And like, I think that they have made something that is very fancy, which is wine, accessible because they have, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's this thing where he offers very, very small pours of very, very expensive wines. So you can go there and you can have an experience where you try different wines that you would never be able to try elsewhere. But because of the way they structure their wine menu, you're able to try like really, really elegant drinks that you usually wouldn't be able to have. And the food is unreal. The steak there you need like 2 to 3 people to eat it, but it's so good. And I got to say, I'm basic. I love Via Napoli.
Yeah, I like Via Napoli, but Wine Bar George is interesting. I haven't been there yet. I admit I have not been to as many Disney Springs places as I should, but I know that I follow AJ from the Disney Food Blog pretty closely, and she's always raving about Wine Bar George, like all the time.
It's really good. It's really, really good, especially from like an adult perspective, because you can go there and it's like, it's not just a wine bar. It's not like a regular old wine bar. The food is unbelievable. Everything on the menu is great. And like, it's just a different atmosphere than you'll find it. Because a lot of those restaurants are really, really good in Disney Springs, but they're kind of like, this is the nice restaurant for this type of cuisine. This is the nice restaurant for this type of cuisine. And Wine Bar George is just, it's different. It offers something that none of the other places do. And it's set up differently. And I really, really enjoy it.
Well, great. So you're writing articles all the time, doing so much, but do you have any big projects for 2020 you're currently doing right now?
Yes, but I cannot discuss them.
That's okay, but I'm excited to find out what they are in the future.
Stay tuned, because I'm going to gab.
So if people want to follow you online or learn more about your work, where should they go?
Oh, everywhere on the internet. I am my first name and last name, which is Carlye Wisel. It's spelled CarlyeWisel. Find me on Twitter and on Instagram, shouting from the rooftops about Disney nonsense all day long. And then my website is myname.com, and there's a link out to a ton of different guides and stories from there.
Well, awesome. This has been a blast, Carlye. Thanks so much for doing it. This is so
much fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we should do it again sometime. I suspect you know a lot of information.
I do. It's gotten to the point where I always talk about like Inside Out and how like some of the memories are just gone. Like I can't remember my childhood because my whole head is like fast pass strategy now. But it's worth it.
Yeah, totally. No, I can sympathize. I think I've planned more trips and things in my head than anything else. It's a good thing though.
It's great. It's great when you're with normal people who aren't into this. It's not great. But when you're with Disney people, it's the best because your brain is like, ooh, we can use like that movie Limitless. It's like I can use 100% of my brain now.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Carlye.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you should definitely check out my 4 episodes with Len Testa of Touring Plans and my 2 shows with AJ Wolf of the Disney Food Blog. You can find that and a lot more at tomorrowsociety.com. If you'd like to support this listener-funded podcast, you can do so through Patreon by becoming an official member of the Tomorrow Society. You get access to some amazing perks, including the monthly show solely for members, which is called the Tomorrow Society Bulletin, where I talk about news, overarching issues about theme parks, and some other cool themes on Disney history. You can learn more at tomorrowsociety.com/member. I love hearing from you. You can email me at dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter at tomorrowsoc or Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with author Nathalia Holt about her awesome book, The Queens of Animation, about women that played such an important role in the history of the Disney studio and today. Thank you so much for listening to this show, and I will talk to you again in 2 weeks.